Hello, I'm John Stormm, and we're calling this one Spellcraft for Dummies. We're going to discuss some intuitive traits known to the weirding clans that you can pretty much consider for yourselves, among yourselves, as you possess or do not possess these things. But the next will be the nature of magic, and the next will be a treatise of what and why, what makes the more superior witch. And then we'll finish it off with a little blurb on Spellcraft 101. The intuitive traits. The point of this is that most witchy types, psychics, shamans, and creative people are said to possess an unusual amount of intuition, and this will manifest as in a whole range of ways. Excuse me. For instance, there is a form known as second sight, which comes to those more visually oriented. A waking dream or vision of something about to happen or that has already happened. Sometimes this occurs in dreaming and gives the sense of deja vu. Some can initiate this effect by laying out cards or runes or scrying into water, crystal, or fire, or even by blindfolding and depriving their eyes of visions long enough for a second set of eyes to kick in. Sensory deprivation tanks also come to mind. They see the event or an object or a person in their mind's eye and then interpret the significance of the vision. Sometimes the whole key to understanding the vision is the interpretation of what is seen as actual or symbolic, past, present, or future. Vagueness in such dreams is a maddening trait, but sometimes that is precisely what is needed to spur our looking deeper into them. But second sight is not the only manifestation of intuitive faculties. It seems the whole gamut of sensory perceptions has deeper qualities that affect their holders. Clairaudients hear voices and things that others in the room may never be aware of. They hear snatches of conversations and events whispered in the winds or in running water or anywhere white noise is available. This has a tendency that runs parallel to the visionary who might use a glimmer of white light to spur their second sense into action. There is also the sensory deprivation tanks, which open a soul up to finding input by other means. Truth all told, intuition comes in all forms and combinations of forms to different people. Something may not smell right to one person. That person may leave a bad taste in our mouths. A gut reaction may leave us not feeling right about something, or feeling a pair of eyes boring into the backs of our heads. It would appear that all of our senses have a second sense that reach beyond the four-dimensional physics our present tense universe operates in. Four and not just three, because there are truly three dimensions of occupied space and one of space-time. Anyone who has ever had to rendezvous at some point or fired a rifle at a clay pigeon is well aware that an X and Y and Z axis along with a proscribed time are required to connect anything in this realm. But some of us arrive from a different direction than the rest. Some of us are more visually attuned to see our visions, while others respond better to the music of the spheres. What could be more natural? I'm a bit holistic in my approaches to many things, and I'll get dreams where I can see the sunshine on the surf under azure skies, hear the pounding of the breaking waves and the cries of the gulls, smell and taste the salt breezes, and feel the sun on my shoulder and the warm sand beneath my bare feet. And if that weren't enough, there's the odd occasion I'll wake up with change in Cayman Island currency in my bedclothes, or an interesting seashell I found still in my hand. There's something to all of this. Obviously, the math goes on beyond the simple 4D equation, and the shortest distance between 2 points is no longer just a straight line, but it's a fold in time and space. Think about it. If you can feel someone watching you, and invariably find this to be true, and not simple paranoia, you'll find that you'll regret not following your instincts about someone you've never met or know of a place you've never been to. Then you are obviously moving around in this plane of existence by roads far less traveled than the norm. Ask yourself how your intuition manifests itself to you. Are you that artistically inclined, or do you have an architect's handle on form and space? Or maybe still life works for you, or film is your forte. It's a good guess that when it kicks in, that it is a primarily visual experience. Are you a great fan of music of any sort? It is likely that at certain times you hear snatches of conversation that is taking place well beyond your natural earshot in your intuitive episodes. For myself, I study the patterns of many things in an effort to understand them. I've been somewhat of an adrenaline junkie in my own right, and have been in a few too many situations where I had to live so fully in the moment to survive. The time scale I experienced was far different from that experienced by those around me. Someone looking to shoot me, and I would feel their scrutiny and roll that part of my body out of the line of fire. There's not much help for moving away from a crazy bastard spraying bullets indiscriminately. For that, only a sense of an overall pattern of events can give me the discretion to avoid being at certain places at specified times. My movements had to be spontaneous, as there was no second guessing, second perceptions, and living to be this old and this healthy. I saved the questions of why this was for a later and more relaxed time of speculation. Coming from the background I had, I knew enough to trust my senses, such as they were. The point of this and other exercises of thoughts on topics so bizarre as this to get it is because of yet another pattern I have observed as a child. I knew sometimes my dreams took me to actual places. I was seeing people and things I had never seen before. Accurately, I knew this was, among other things, called astral projection or remote viewing, though sometimes it went beyond just simple viewing. Grandma stocked me up on books on many topics, and I had read case histories of people even 100 years ago or more that had experienced some of the things I was going through, and I started looking for the patterns. Oh well, and it's just one of those things were not going to suffice, and I was not going to be driven mad from the inexplicable why me, why me, why me. Many decades later, in the Intellect Paranormal Forum, we took these correlated circumstances and took the common formulae inherent in the overall experience of astral projection and duplicated the results on a monthly basis. Some did better than others, but naturally, but all of us learned something. Some of us learned how to do this on purpose, or at the very least increase our chances of doing it accidentally. We each have our own case histories and our own intuitive processes, no matter how slight it may seem. We need to better discern the patterns of what it brings, on what it makes it work, and how we are each benefited by our perceptions. Years ago, when I was raising my babies, I wanted to increase their survivability. I taught them skills, and we played games together that would enhance those traits in such a way that they wouldn't be such total strangers when they happened. Perhaps these experiences are best recorded in the inner circles of Witch Clan, but I wanted you all to think about them. Some of you want to be better witches or wizards. Some have been burned in their own coven or other group experiences. You have the means here for study and safe experimentation at little cost. I'm not charging a dime. I won't let anybody else charge for this either, except that you get out of a thing factors with what study and application you put into it. Some of us are teachers and some of us are students. Some of us are both, which asserts to me that no matter what topics we want to explore, none of us are strangers to study. What we have here is a rabbit hole, dear Alice. Is anyone else interested in finding out just how far this really goes? Time and again in these forums and in stories and articles I've put about, I've always spouted my warnings for witches who buy spell books or rely heavily upon such things. Not that I don't believe in good spell work. It's just that I believe more than most of you in the efficacy of a good spell. My issues with the spell books is that too many wannabe witches will take that spell as the end-all solution to any particular problem, and oftentimes end up creating more trouble for themselves in the long runs, and never get a clue as to why all this happened to them to begin with. It is not what we consider wise at all. You have to remember, witch and wise are two words. They mean the same thing, or they're supposed to. Right. I've always said that it is not enough to know what. but the superior witch will know why a thing is so. There's wisdom in those words, and wisdom is the word we get our labels of witches and wizards from. So it stands to reason that if we are called such, we should have some. A witch who gets a solution from a spell book knows what. It could probably be drivel, or there's probably some deep wisdom in there, but they missed it in the ceremony somewhere. I'm going to paint a bit of an analogy to illustrate what I mean and why it is so. Mr. What found himself at the base of a wooded hill on an overcast day and realized he was very much lost. He is not a stupid or an unlearned man by anyone's standards, and very well read in a number of subjects. A jack of all trades he had been called on many an occasion. He knew that the northern borders of the national park that he was lost in was bordered by a rough mountainous terrain. It was no place he wanted to go. He also remembered, as he viewed the map in his memory, that the park was bordered on the eastern side by a highway. So wherever he was in the park, if he continued going east, he would have to meet up with that highway sooner or later. The problem was how to determine which way was east with no compass, moon, stars, or sun to give him a clue. Fortunately, he recalled reading that moss always grows on the north side of a tree. Why this was so, he had no idea. He figured it might be due to some inherent magnetic quality of the moss or the trees, and looking at the trees before him, he noticed which side the moss was on and determined that if that was north, then by facing in that direction, which he certainly did not want to go, then east would be to his immediate right hand. A clever man, our Mr. What, and not to allow himself to go off course, he faced north as he knew it, picked out the tallest tree he could see in the distance directly off his right hand, and steered himself a course directly to it, and then to the tallest object beyond this, and same way continued on till he came out of the woods at the base of the mountainous that he did not want to travel to, with miles of rough terrain to negotiate in any direction and very little strength left to do it. Mr. Y was traveling these same woods when he came to the identical wooded hill as his predecessor and realized that he too was lost. He too had read that moss grows on the north side of tree trunks, but he also knew why that adage was mostly true. There were no magnetic qualities to the moss or the trees, but in the northern hemisphere, the southern side of the trees from east to west was the sunny side of the trees, and the moss preferred the shadier northern side to thrive in, as this is not a plant that does well in direct sunlight. Looking at the trees at the base of the hill before him, he ruled these out as good examples because regardless of the compass direction, the hill at the back of these trees was going to provide a perpetual shadow for the moss to thrive in. Instead, he moved to the trees at the top of the hill that he would get nearly unobstructed sunlight from whatever direction it came from. And by them he determined by the evidence of the moss on which side was the northern exposure. He then determined from this which way was east. He set his landmarks and hiked a couple of hours before he intersected with the highway. Mr. What knew just enough to get himself in deeper trouble. Mr. Y knew how to deal with the trouble at hand. A spell book may give you many interesting options, but if you know how and why a spell works, you can craft your own to suit the situation you are actually in, and not a generic piece of information that might actually dig yourself in deeper. The practice of keeping a notebook or a book of shadows is intended to give the diligent witch a leg up in what works and for what situation and why. From this information, the proper course can be set to get our intrepid witch to where they want to go and not someplace worse than when they started. In most witchy circles, the spelling of magic, M-A-G-I-C-K, as thus differentiates it from the magic, M-I-G-I-C, of the stage magician. Truth told, a little smoke and mirrors will suffice for certain types of spells, but those aren't the ones I'll discuss in this article. First, I need to go back to family definition of a spell. A spell is a period of time, like a rainy spell, a sunny spell, a dizzy spell, set a spell. It's a period of time where a certain influence or influences are brought to bear to accomplish a desired goal. As with his spells, it is important that we cast away the popular version of what constitutes spellcraft, as with what a traditional witch actually uses and does in spellcraft. It is a very wide and encompassing discipline. Much truth is concealed in popular superstition. It can be very insulting for some witches that when we're identified as such, that it is often assumed that we are backwards and superstitious in nature. There is a deeper reality that gets overlooked. The same holds true for the term magic. In a reality, magic is merely a catch-all word for forces beyond an individual's understanding. To the witch or wizard who works such forces, they will know that a particular magic by a more defining word or term. To give an easy illustration how this might work in layman's term, I'll use an everyday example of how this works. Remember, this applies levels within levels to all sorts of things and nearly everything. The television set today is a magical device that very few of the owners of such really understand. A lot of invisible forces go into the making and operation of this marvelous device. Most will say it's not magic but electricity, even then without really understanding how that energy is further identified in ohms, amps, volts, and watts, and manipulated through microscopic devices to collect and amplify yet other invisible forces of electromagnetic radiation to give them pictures and sounds of faraway happenings. The average person simply knows the set must be plugged in for power and some kind of antenna or cable to provide the signal. How that is all possible is just another of life's mysteries. Thus it makes a good study for the idea or concept of magic. Like all magic, it has its superstitious masses of believers with their own ideas and formulas for solving the inherent problems of the technology that they really don't understand. They are watching the football game on the magic box and it suddenly decides not to show the game. This is often blamed on blown circuit breakers, if the house is dark for instance, bad reception or interference, glitches, or even gremlins, a popular NASA term. The first spell to straighten the problem out involves rapping soundly on the set 3 times while uttering the appropriate pleas or epithets. Come on, baby. Give us the game. Give us the game. Failing that, the techno-practitioner might employ a more drastic means by employing the use of a wand, often called a Phillips head screwdriver, and poking it about in the back of the set to see if it is not working because something might be loose, kind of as the result of all the magic wrapping, for instance. At this point, the problem has not dissipated, and many times it will be, as this magic is widely known and popular, it may have even gotten worse by the gremlins in the back of the set, attacking the magic wand and sending the practitioner flying in defiance of gravity. The next step would be to take the gremlin-possessed unit to be put to rights by a more experienced wizard of the discipline known as electronics, sometimes known as a TV repairman. This wizard, in their understanding of the forces of amps and ohms and volts and watts, will then apply their own wands and arcane devices to correct the flow of such energies and restore the set to working order, to the bliss of the appreciative owner, who will then render the wizard due benevolence for his craft in the form of hard currency. The concept is that people cannot perceive with their eyes or understand as, quote, supernatural or magic. Often that magic is labeled as an unnatural force because of this, and the reality is far more the opposite. Magic is always a natural force. Whether it is immediately understood by the general populace or does not define it, it exists because it is inherent in the workings of the things we can see and think we understand. Why is the grass bending to the north? Is it in worship of the North Star? Or is it an invisible force of the south wind is causing it to bend northward? Can this magic be used to reverse my aging process or turn things into other things? Let me further pique your understanding of these things with another illustration. Shortly after World War II, in various South Sea islands, there were discovered what became known as cargo cults. The shamans of these aboriginal groups had defined for their people the magnificent silver thunderbirds that were observed traveling about the islands and leaving those valuable commodities, canned foods, pots, pans, barrels, things that can be made into other things that they can need and use and make life practical and easier. Those that cited such places as these mystical beings visited brought their knowledge back to the tribes and constructed effigies of cargo planes and ceremonial airstrips and prayed that these gods with the skies would come and give their tribe prosperity again. They weren't really too far off when you think about it. It got for some modern attention, and eventually they got all the things they asked for, modern conveniences and such. The defining part of this miracle was that any of these people knew that anything that got tossed into the air came down hard and fast, but the magic of these machines contradicted nature and kept them aloft and allowed them not to come down easily. The truth is that the law of gravity was not broken by the technology, but superseded by another law that was brought into effect by that technology, and that being the law of aerodynamics, which includes such mysterious concepts as the relationship of lift, thrust, drag, and weight, manipulated in such a way as to get sustainable and controllable flight. But that's not magic at all, one might say. Not to them, but imagine the effect that if that native shaman grasped aerodynamics of what he saw and built himself a hang glider and then flew across the island to other islands, to other villages, his wizardry would have granted him near godlike status in their legends and their stories. Compared to the average adult, who could argue that this man was not a step or two above normal humanity? Such is magic when it is worked by someone who understands or is learning to understand those things that others don't see. An electrician knows that he cannot see an amp or an ohm, but he has devices that can perceive and even measure the quantities of such things. The way we observe the grass bending northward as an indicator that an invisible force was blowing from the south, maybe circumstances made it so that we could not feel the wind or watching from indoors or behind a big windbreak. We could determine the effects of certain forces by the effect they have on what is present. Do the seas rise? Is it a flood caused by the addition of more water, or is it the influence of the mystical moon? In ancient times, the transmuting of lead into gold was considered some of the highest magic of the day. Now ask yourself, what could they have seen to have given them this idea? Today, a doctor of physics could tell you that it was merely a matter of changing the atomic weight of a lead molecule by 1 to affect the transmutation, and the only reason that it is not commonly done today is that it is prohibitively expensive to change lead atoms one at a time to make any appreciable amount of gold with today's technology. Since they didn't use particle accelerators and lasers in ancient times, what little known law of nature did they stumble upon to transmute some lead into gold? So many books have been burned by the willfully ignorant as being the devil's work. In the short century or so, when a lot of myths about knowledge were put to rest, look at the advances that have been made. In the prior centuries, certain men and women were every bit as resourceful. Advances made were often labeled as occult, mystical, or diabolical and destroyed as witchcraft. In ancient times, the ideas of people stepping through portals into other worlds, the Tuatha De Dananns and the Shi, to name but a few, were commonplace in the concepts relegated to mystical beings capable of great magic. In the modern university, mathematicians and quantum theory opens not so new ideas of parallel universes and wormholes and other dimensions where physical laws allow the miraculous as commonplace. My point is, the magic has always been there. It is not so mystical except to those who do not understand or have not studied it. It is not unnatural, but it is very much so natural. Those who study its workings are called wizards or witches or just wise. But then it is known and understood. It is no longer defined as magic, but still there are the masses that will treat it with superstitious awe. There are the fools that to this day will raise their golf club in defiance to the heavens of a thunderstorm and call down the wrath of lightning upon themselves. There are those with wisdom who will use the same precepts to construct a lightning rod to protect their homes and barns from such ravages. The difference between magic and science is the difference between the learned and the ignorant. There are many kinds of spells as there are people to cast them. Most people don't really know what a spell is, and yet almost everyone uses them at some point or another in their lives. Webster's dictionary has 3 listings for the word spell. The one most people would think I was referring to is spell, a word or words supposed to have magical power, magic formula, fascination. This definition lists kinds of spells, but does not define a spell. Webster's 3rd definition comes closer to reality. Spell, noun, a turn of work or duty, a brief period of time. Our clan matriarch taught us to view and work spells with this definition. Spell, a set period of time where a specific influence or influences are brought to bear on people, things, or circumstances to bring about a desired goal. Now we have a definition that makes sense in the realm of magic. Face it, every spell ever cast was to accomplish some desired end. They may not all seem mystical or magical, but then opening a rift into Gwynedd isn't all that magical to me, only because I understand what has taken place, and in understanding the forces and influences I am working with, I can effectively use them or work with them. We take a television or a computer to a techno-wizard who understands the mystic forces that make it operate. They work their own magic and the appliance is up and running again. Magic, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. Another prime example of magic is that romantic interest is coming over for dinner tonight. The lighting is chosen to soften the features and to add a warm glow to the room. Music is thoughtfully chosen for the message it gives, either actively or subliminally. Clothing and grooming is carefully chosen and applied to highlight our most seductive features. We may choose chocolates, strawberries, and sweet red wine for their aphrodisiac qualities. A magical evening is planned just like any spell of any true witch or wizard. Time, energy, and forethought is invested into enchanting the quarry into sweet submission. Done successfully, they are spellbound. The charm of fascination is an old spell with many variants. It draws the attention of the mark and holds it. What's to be accomplished with this fascinated individual in this state will be the determining factors as to how deeply or lightly we will have to apply our spell work. The candlelight dinner will keep our intended's attention within the confines of its warm, dim circle of light. The sparkle of the firelight in our eyes will keep their attention in a manner so bewitching that we will create the desires in them that we wish to experience. It can be overdone as well. Too much can be as bad as too little. When working spells, we need to find the appropriate balance or limitations for our project. Its boundaries, as it were. A simple and easy example of the charm of fascination is as follows, or at least how it's used in a spell. Creating a period of time. Richard was having a terrible time meeting girls in school. He wasn't as cool as some, nor as athletic as others, nor did he have the characteristic dimples the latest boy fad had. But he wasn't a bad guy at all if the girls could only see him. Therein the problem lies, getting the chance to be seen. I listened to him and I prescribed a charm of fascination, an ancient charm with modern applications. I took to crafting him an unusual and mysterious looking amulet on a short chain, as to be a choker, not too tight, but it can't drape too far under the shirt. It's always up in plain sight. I had informed him that I would require his help in the crafting of this artifact by the next full moon. Purposely I muttered my thoughts in Latin and Gaelic as we crafted. He was to wear it constantly, and when asked, he could only reply that it was a secret or the magic would falter. Before the next school week was out, Richard had many conversations with young ladies. By the next full moon, he was dating regularly. The major influences of this charm were as follows. His belief in the effectiveness of the magics involved bolstered his self-confidence to a point where he actually followed through in a conversation past the initial "hello." My Latin and Gaelic mutterings were a little more than me voicing my intentions out loud. This reinforced his belief that magic was being worked. It was. The charm was something rarely seen or understood by the general populace and worn in plain view. It caught the eye as a fascination should. When asked, it was a secret. At this point, I have a more confident Richard, ready to socialize. I created a conversation piece to draw the eye and a mystery to hold the attention. When someone asked him about his curious neck charm, they got a mysterious answer and naturally want to know more. In the process, they got to know Richard, giving him a chance at romance and just plain giving him a chance to be seen. The point, there are many types of influences that can be applied to any specific problem. Would a wise person use a bazooka to get rid of a pesky mosquito? It's possible to do, but it's not wise. Likewise, when a television set starts acting poorly, one might grab their magic screwdriver and start poking around in the back of the set. But if they're not knowledgeable about the forces they're dealing with, namely volts, amps, ohms, and current and such, they'll end up creating a bigger problem. The same holds true in spellcraft. We should consider our problems in the light of influences we know well, that we can bring to bear to achieve our goals. As our world expands with our understanding, we'll have a larger selection of forces to work in our craft, to put in our toolbox, you might say. As the saying goes, knowledge is power.